Welcome back to Life the Germ. I'm your host, Jay Remy, on the track. Um, yeah, we're back. I was kicking around some ideas for a little while. And this one came to mind like as I was driving home from work, and I was like, we gotta rip this because this is about to be a crazy one. Usually I'll get up and show the album off and stuff, but honestly, like, you guys, you guys already can see it, so I don't even need to do it. I realized I forgot to look up song of the week, so I'm gonna do that quick. Song of the week. So the album's called Stony by Post Malone. Most of you are probably familiar with it. The graphic art on Spotify is different than on the record, which is kind of cool. Like, I always like when they do like limited stuff like that. Um, oh man, there's so many good songs on here. Like, I honestly think my favorite. I have a story about this song. So I listened to this album back in the day in like high school, right? And then I went to Germany in high school, and then this one guy, I think there, shout out Jackson for the one time, he he started listening to Go Flex on this album, and I was like, it was kind of a sleeper. Like, when I first listened to the album, I was like, like White Iverson, Congratulations, like those are the two big ones. Deja Vu, JB, I mean that's a classic. Um, but then he pulled out Go Flex, and like I really like that one. So I think that one really sticks out to me as like song of the week off that album. So go check it out if you haven't. Stony baby. But yeah, I think kind of just getting into um I guess a little bit about like my day. Um I So right now I'm recording this probably like it's like 2 weeks before Christmas. So it's like really just this final push at work where I'm just like kind of just exhausted. Like, I get like 2 weeks off for Christmas. So I'm like Christmas and New Year. So I'm like, dude, like it's right there. But like the more you want it, the like slower it comes, I feel like. And for me, I'm like, every day is just crawling by. We made it through today, but like, um, and this is kind of how I got on sort of the wisdom of the week, because I was doing this experiment and I thought I could do it, and like I did it like a long time ago, like a year ago, and I like thought I remembered how to do it and stuff, and then I sat down and did it and realized like I really had no idea what I was doing, and I pretty much just like messed it all up. And um yeah, it wasn't like a great feeling, right? Like, I'm sure there's many more days for that like to come in my career, and really any career. I feel like you just have days like that where nothing really seems to go right. But you learn a lot, right? Um and I think that's when something kind of sparked on my way home. It's always on these like drives home when I think of something. And I I think the common trope when you have days like this is um sort of catastrophize things. That's kind of like I feel like a catch-all kind of word where you just like people use it a lot, but I don't actually think people actually know what it means fully. Like, basically just like whatever the worst possible outcome is for a situation, like even if that outcome does happen, you think like the world is gonna end, and like nothing can be worse than the outcome that you received. And um I left lab today feeling kind of that way. Like, it was just like, not even, man. I think um like I left I left lab, but I still felt sort of just like sad, and not like catastrophizing, like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, like it did suck, but I think, um, just I mean, I think it's okay to feel like bummed about stuff, like I think for sure I was like really upset about it, and I was really kind of like, oh, it didn't work out the way I wanted, so I was kind of bummed about it, but I think it is common in society to kind of catastrophize things and feel like it is the end of the world, right? And the whole point of the title, the pivot points, is started to get at this idea that no matter how bad things get, and I think I've talked about this, but I've never explicitly like sort of like called it out in an episode, right? And like made it its own thing. Is there's always some sort of alternative, right? And I think no matter how bad something gets, there's always like another way or another solution to something. And I think that's really like an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you have days like this where maybe you find yourself like in this in this really serious mindset where like everything's so deep, and like if anything goes wrong it's like the end of the world, where it's like totally not, but it is easy to get like that. And I think um yeah, it's like it's okay to feel that way sometimes, like, and I think the important thing to remember is to not like just give up on it, right? And I think for me, I definitely feel like a lot of other people, like you feel a little guilty to be kind of sad or like let down a little bit, because it's like, um everyone's always like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And it's like, I just had a bad day, and it's as my buddy Nate likes to say, it's not that deep. Like, yeah, I had a bad day, but like we're gonna bounce back, right? It's not like it's the end of the world. And I think society often makes it out to be like, oh, like being sad is just like really like, oh, don't be sad, don't be, it's like, no, like there's a time and a place to get in your feels, right? And Inside Out, the movie, kind of hints at that. I actually really like that movie because of that, because I think that really gets overlooked. Like, everyone puts on this facade, like they're always so like happy go lucky and whatnot. And it's like, no, like, there's days where I don't feel like that, like you can the cool thing about it is that like you can still be a positive person and still have days like that, and still like recognize like, yeah, I'm sad now and I'm going to accept that feeling and know that like days to come, like there will be better days, right? And like not every day can go like how you always want it to. But kind of honing in on the wisdom of the week here, I think the pivot points is like when you find yourself in these moments where your experiment fails, things don't go the intended outcome that you want to have, right? I think kind of just recognizing that, hey, okay, this happened, but there all are alternatives. There's substitutions and stuff you can make to counteract whatever happened, right? And it's never the end of the world, and it's almost rarely ever the last straw, right? Like there's ways that you can make do, and get make it better, and I think um what pivot points really gets at is when you hit these lows, recognize like, hey, today, for example, this is a prime example, like this happened to me. It was really crap, but already I'm thinking about, okay, this was a bad day, I don't really want to talk to anyone, but I already know what my next step is going to be, right? I'm going to reach out to this person, to that person, and we're going to try it this way instead and see if that works better, and pivoting to some other outcome, like A couple months ago, I like really messed up my foot bad. I was hitting all these crazy miles running, like going on all these runs, and then, um, you know, my I thought I was above like the new shoes type deal, and I wore these shoes that I wore in like college like 4 years ago, and there was nothing left in them, right? They were in no means like good to be running in, and yeah, they were junk shoes, and then I like injured myself for like a month. My foot just like I don't even know what happened, but it just like for a month like I couldn't run, and whenever I would run, there would be like pain there, right? And I was like, okay, I can. Well, I had to stop running, right? But you pivot, right? Okay, it's like okay, so if I can't run, then what can I do? So I worked out more. I tried to hit the gym a little more. Like there's always other options you can take, right? I think that's like the important thing to keep in mind. And yeah, and I think it's often overlooked a lot of times, right? Like, oh, like we can just, well, I guess we just give up, like I guess, you get this terrible day and it's like, oh, I guess that's it. It's like, no, it's not, that's not always the case. There's always more to the piece of pie, I guess, not always, unless your friends eat it all, I guess. But yeah, so that was kind of the rundown. It wasn't a lot, but I think for what it it is sort of powerful. And take away that when you do hit this rock bottom point, that there's always another option. There's always another person you can talk to. There's always another way you can do something or look at something differently. And honestly, like sort of allows you to like be creative with it and like apply your creativity to sort of like work around like and find a new solution, right? So yeah, I think with that, I I kind of want to. There's actually one thing, and usually I'll end it with the wisdom of the week, but this week, since I feel like I covered the flu vaccine last week, I kind of want to go over the mRNA vaccines this week, um, because I feel like it just makes sense, like so. Flu vaccine we already went over. Basically, they take a dead virus, in this case the flu, and they stick it in a vaccine, and then they stick it in your arm, and it goes in, right? For mRNA vaccine, it's somewhat similar, but a little bit different, right? Okay, so this is gonna require like, as I like adjust my glasses, this is gonna require a little bit of like bio bloke knowledge for you guys to understand. So, um, I'm just gonna start assuming you know nothing about biology. Okay, so in all of our cells we have genes, right? I'm sure each and every one of you has at least heard of the term gene, right? And genes are um, they're made up of they're composed of DNA, right? And we all know what DNA is. DNA is the molecule that makes up your genetic code. So what tells your body like how your cells are gonna function and like survive, right? Is all the code, imagine like you're baking a recipe, right? The genes are the recipe for baking you, essentially. It's kind of crazy to put it that way, but that's actually true. Um, and each gene is a different part of the recipe, right? So there's a ton of genes. I don't even actually know how many genes are in the human genome, but there are like at least, oh my gosh, I would say like thousands, if not millions of genes. Like there are a lot of genes, right? So each one of those is a different part of the recipe, right? Um, and viruses, all microbes, like all living things, like have these, right? They all have genes, like little instructions telling them how to make that organism, right? Um, So viruses also have this, right? And how this fits in is because viruses have, they're smaller and therefore like have a very like a lot smaller genome than we do. So much so that I think like, okay, like the first mRNA vaccine was, the COVID vaccine, SARS-CoV-2. So let's start with that. SARS-CoV-2, like I don't know how many genes it has. Let's say it has like 100 genes. It's pretty small, right? So one of the components that your immune system recognizes, a gene in the virus encodes for that, right? So what scientists did is they sequenced the genome. So they determined like what is the makeup of the SARS-CoV-2 genome, right? And they found the gene that your immune system will recognize, right? So your immune cells will recognize that gene. And what will happen is from a gene, what you get is you get this DNA, right? And then something else comes that sort of so let's keep this analogy of the recipe going, right? So you have the recipe, which is like the organism, right? You have the gene, which are like different parts of the recipe. So let's say I think of like baking cookies, right? Like you need like half a teaspoon vanilla, half a cup of flour, sugar, whatever. That was totally wrong for cookies. Don't take my advice on that. But okay, you have all these components, but then how do you know which components to use, right? And that's where the physical recipe comes into play, right? So we'll use the actual recipe as, so the physical components like vanilla, sugar, like whatever, all these different components that make it up, those are the genes, the individual ingredients. But how do you actually know how to put those all together, right? And this is where like the sort of the phrase of like mRNA kind of comes into play. So it's RNA is like a derivative of DNA. It's not as stable, so it'll like break down quicker. But the M in mRNA stands for messenger RNA. So it's sort of like it is like physically like the instructions that tell. So the DNA are the instructions, but the mRNA is like, imagine the mRNA is like messenger, like you reading the recipe and being like, oh, now I understand how to do this because I like read it, right? So you read the recipe and you're like, boom, oh, now I know how to do it. So going back to the virus now, you have the gene that your immune system recognizes, and then you have this piece that is like in a readable form, which is mRNA, right? And from there, what you can do is you can take that piece of mRNA that you made from the gene in the virus, and then you stick that in a vaccine. So the difference between the flu vaccine and the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine is that the flu vaccine has the whole virus, whereas the mRNA vaccine is literally just like a written instruction on like how to make one part of the virus that your immune system recognizes. I hope that wasn't confusing. It might be a little confusing. It wasn't the best explanation, but okay. Now, assuming you're still with me, basically they take those instructions, that piece of mRNA, and they stick it in a vaccine, right? And then what happens is after that, they'll actually put the mRNA in what's called like a lipid nanoparticle. So they'll surround it with a bunch of lipids. So then like the piece of mRNA is like, imagine it like, we call it like encapsulated, right? So it's like totally surrounded by these lipids, right? You stick that in your arm, and then what happens is those little lipids can actually go into your cells. So they'll actually just imagine the microphone is like your cell, and this is like the lipid cell from the vaccine. It'll just like zoop, and then it goes inside your cell. And then what you have is just that mRNA that's left that makes, is the instructions for making that one part of SARS-CoV-2. So then what happens is your body actually will take this piece of information and it'll actually make that part of the virus. So now you have your cells actually making that part of the virus. And then what happens is now you have that part of the virus that's in your cells. Now after that, now your immune system can recognize it. And then it's the same as like the flu vaccine as I was describing earlier. It's like a way of exposing your immune system to this like primary exposure to the virus. So then when you actually do get the virus, your immune system is going to recognize that piece that we put in the vaccine, and it's going to be like, oh, I've already seen this before, and it's just going to kill it and take it out really fast. And again, just to reiterate, you will still get sick, probably. There's a chance you might just be asymptomatic, but odds are like you'll probably still get like a runny nose, maybe a fever, but it'll be nowhere near like the level that you had it if you were to like see it for the first time, right? So that one's a little more complicated and a little harder to break down than the flu vaccine. So maybe I got to work on that explanation. Let me know if you understood that. If not, I'll think of some better analogies, but that's life of the germ. And I don't know. I think at least for YouTube, I probably won't upload again until the new year. Maybe I'll surprise you guys. I think I'm actually going to bring my camera home when I go home for the holidays. So maybe I'll sit down and record in like a different location. You guys will be like, oh my gosh, like this isn't even the same spot. But we'll see. But hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I'll catch you in the next one.